Have you always wanted to play a Boros aggro deck in Commander? Do you like vehicles? Then we got the deck for you. Kolodin, Triumph Caster. He's a 2-drop and he's an absolute powerhouse of the newest Aetherdrift set. Kolodin has really simple abilities, but they're oh so strong. Kolodin gives all your mounts and vehicles haste, which is really awesome in itself. Whenever a mount enters the battlefield under your control, it automatically gets settled, no matter what the saddle cost is. Same thing goes for vehicles, which is the best part about this card. Whenever a vehicle enters, it gets crewed, so it enters as a creature, and you can instantly swing with it due to the haste he gives them. Awesome. So why is he strong? Obviously, most mounts and vehicles have really strong abilities that trigger when they attack. With Kolodin, they have an impact immediately when they hit the board. They get crewed, they get settled, and you can instantly swing with them. Really powerful. Today, I'll be going over the entire deck list I made for Kolodin. We'll be going really in depth, so I divided it up in 6 categories. The creatures, vehicles and mounts, the support spells, interaction spells, utility lands, and the regular lands. Let's go! Since we have access to white, there's no reason not to play Esper Sentinel. He's one of the best 1-drops ever printed, and he gives us a ton of card advantage. You just drop him on turn 1, everyone has to pay 1 whenever they cast a non-creature spell, or we get to draw a card. Since Boros has a really hard time drawing cards, this card is just a fantastic fit for the deck. You can also saddle and crew the mounts and vehicles we play. An awesome new uncommon from the Aetherdrift set we're playing is Cloudspire Coordinator. He's a 2-drop. Whenever he enters the battlefield, we get to scry 2, which is really relevant in this deck since we want to scry our lands to the bottom or keep them on top, depending on how much we have in hand. And we can also tap him to create pilot tokens equal to the amount of vehicles that enter this turn. This gets out of hand really fast, and sometimes we get to even create 2, 3, 4 pilot tokens in one turn. Awesome to crew the vehicles. All-time classic white card, especially for artifact decks, is Aethersworn Canonist. Essentially, this awesome 2-drop artifact creature only allows people to play 1 non-artifact spell during their turn. This can lock down a lot of decks like Storm or combo decks, and we don't really have a downside by playing it. Also an awesome body to crew the vehicles. We're also playing gnomes in this deck. Oswald Fiddlebender. He essentially is a birthing pot for white artifact decks. We get to pay 1 mana, tap him, we can sacrifice an artifact and tutor our library for another artifact with 1 more as a mana value. This is really awesome to get out the creatures you need, especially the vehicles. Once they enter, Kolodin will grant them haste and make sure they're crewed, so you can instantly swing with them. Really strong card in this deck, it's a must play. One of the more complex cards in this deck we're playing is Sunwell Avenger Ace. Whenever we have an attacking artifact creature, all combat damage dealt to Sunwell will be prevented, which is a solid ability, but that's not the reason we play him. Main reason is a second ability. So whenever Sunwell becomes tapped, we get to exile the top 6 cards from our library. From there, we can cast any artifact or vehicle spells. This is a special sort of trigger that's kind of weird with timings. You actually have to cast a card while his ability is resolving. So you can even put the creatures into play on instant speed if you tap them. It's really weird. If you have questions, you can always put them in the comments below. A cool trick with Sunwell is whenever you tap him, his ability triggers, right? You can also tap creatures to saddle already saddled mounts or crew already crewed vehicles. So whenever a vehicle is already a creature, you can still use Sunwell to tap him to crew it again of sorts and trigger his ability. It's a weird trick, it's a weird card, it's really complex, but he's awesome in the deck, a real powerhouse. Since we are in Boros, we really lack good card draw options. For that reason, we play cards like Sram, Senior Edificer. Whenever we cast a vehicle, he allows us to draw a card. This is really awesome value, especially in our deck, where we will run out of gas really fast without cards like this. So before Kolodin existed, we had another awesome Boros vehicle commander. Depala Pilot Exemplar. We also play it in this deck. She buffs dwarves, which doesn't really matter. She also has an aura that buffs vehicles with +1/+1, which is pretty cool in an aggressive vehicle deck. Whenever the Pala gets tapped, we get to pay X mana. Then we get to look at the top X cards of our library. All vehicles and dwarves in there we get to put in our hand, rest goes to the bottom of our library. Another card that gives great card advantage in a Boros deck. Talking about dwarves, we actually played him, so you have targets for Depala. Digside Engineer. Whenever we cast an artifact spell, we get to create a token with power and toughness equal to the amount of artifacts we control. This is a perfect card to generate value when you have a couple of mana left and you don't have anything to play in your hand. The tokens will get really big really fast. All-time classic card for artifact decks. Foundry Inspector, he's a 3-drop, 3 power, so it's really relevant to crew the vehicles that require a crew of 3. And he reduces the cost of all artifact spells we play by 1 colorless mana, which is basically anything in this deck. If you play the game in the Fallout series, you know the next card. Paladin Dance, Steel Maverick. He's a Vigilance lifelink 3/3 with an awesome ability. We get to exile him on instant speed to grant every artifact or human creature we control indestructible. Since Kolodin has a really big bullseye on his neck, since he's such an explosive commander and enables your entire deck, he will be removed. Paladin Dance gives him some awesome protection. The 3 power also is really relevant to crew or vehicles. Astor, Bearer of Blades. He's a card that sees play in a lot of equipment decks, but he also works in vehicle decks. Whenever he enters the battlefield, we get to look at the top 7 cards of our library, reveal a vehicle from them, and put it in our hand. Really solid ability. He also gives all of our vehicles crew 1. So we can use any token to crew even our biggest vehicles. Solid value card. Another awesome Boros commander we play in the 99 is Alibu Ancient Witness. First ability is irrelevant. Gives all of our artifact creatures haste. We have Kolodin, so not relevant. Main reason we play her is a second ability. Whenever 1 or more artifact creatures we control attacks, we get to deal X damage to any target. And we also get to scry X, where X is the amount of tapped artifacts we control. First part acts as solid removal, just pinging someone's commander. Second part, the scrying, is also really relevant since we can really filter through our deck, scrying the lands we don't need to the bottom or leaving them on top if we do need them. Illustrious Wanderglyph. It's a card that's been played in a lot of artifact decks as a game finisher. It has the City's Blessing. Whenever we control 10 or more permanents, all our artifact creatures get +2/2, which is a really solid aura effect. Even when we don't have the City's Blessing, the last line of the card is still active, granting us a colorless gnome artifact creature at the beginning of each upkeep. Not just yours, each upkeep. So 1 round around the table will give you 4 gnomes. And when you have the City's Blessing, they're not just 1/1s, they're actually 3 trees. Awesome to crew the vehicles, awesome to swing with, really solid card to close out games with. Our first Metalcraft card, Jorkadin the Prevailer. He's a really simple card, 5/4 first striker, good body, and he has Metalcraft. Meaning if we control 3 or more artifacts, he gives all of our creatures +3/0. Really aggressive stat line and will make sure you can close out games just by turning all your vehicles sideways. Even your tokens. Yeah, I know, you're all watching to see which mounts and vehicles we're playing in this deck. But before we move on to those, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the channel to see more of these awesome videos. Let's get into the vehicles. So what if I told you if we played a 7 power, 11 toughness creature for just 1 mana? You wouldn't believe it, right? Consulate Dreadnought. Really simple card, 1 mana for a 7/11 creature with crew 6. Obviously with Kolodin on the field, this just enters and can swing immediately. Really powerful, and we can use the pilot tokens in our deck to crew it easily. Well, now that we're on the topic of overstatted vehicles for a really low mana cost, Colossal Plow is a 6/3 for 2 generic mana. Really solid. Again, with Kolodin, this will enter and you will be able to swing immediately. Whenever you swing with it, you generate 3 white mana and you gain 3 life. 3 white mana doesn't empty from your pool until the end of your turn. So this basically also acts as a ramp tool. And don't forget, it swings for 6 power. We mainly play vehicles in this deck, but we also play a few mounts. Gilded Golda being the first. It's a 2-drop mount with Saddle 1. Whenever it attacks, you get to generate a treasure token. We play Boros. It's hard for us to generate a lot of mana. We can't ramp, we don't have access to green, but we do have access to treasure tokens. This really helps you out in the early game. Since it comes down, has haste, Kolodin saddles it, and you can swing with it. As I mentioned before, Boros really has problems with ramping mana. So we play cards like Mobile Homestead. It's a vehicle, whenever it attacks, you get to flip the top card of your library. If it's a land, you get to put it into play tapped. Really awesome acceleration. It's kind of a gamble if you hit a land or not, but awesome if it pays off. So I keep talking about Boros not having access to ramp, which is a really big downside. Another downside is we don't have access to great card draw. So we play cards like Reckoner Bankbuster. It's a 2-drop 4/4 vehicle, so really solid with Kolodin. You get to swing instantly with it, but it also enters with 3 counters on it. You can use 2 mana, tap it, you get to draw a card, really solid. Whenever all the counters are removed, so when you drew 3 cards, you get to create 1 treasure token and 1 pilot token. Really awesome card, fits the deck perfectly. Probably the most well-known vehicle of all time, Smuggler's Copter. It's a 2-drop 3/3 flyer, really awesome body, has evasion, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you get to loot. So draw a card, discard a card. Again, we have to filter through the deck so we can discard lands we don't need or discard cards we don't need. I promise we'll be getting into the big vehicles later. First up, we still need ways to fix our mana. For example, Aerial Surveyor. It's a vehicle that even sees play in non-vehicle decks just because it has such a good ability. Whenever it attacks and your opponent controls more lands than you do, you get to search your library for basic planes, put it into play tapped, and accelerate your mana that way. Another Fallout card we play is Brotherhood Vertibird. It's a 3-drop, it's a flyer, and the power is equal to the amount of artifacts we control. This can get out of hand really fast when we create treasure tokens, and you can usually swing for 10, 20, 30 damage. Really solid, especially with Kolodin giving this haste. Another way to fix treasure tokens and our mana is careening minecart. Really simple, 3 mana, you play it, get screwed by Kolodin, you swing, you get a treasure token. Awesome to set up for later turns and more vehicles. The vehicle equivalent of a mana rock is Cultivator's Caravan. It's a 3-drop 5/5, good body. We can also tap it to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool. Can accelerate, can swing, perfect fit for the deck. Arguably one of the strongest cards in the deck. Peace Walker Colossus. He's a 3 mana 6/6 vehicle. Really solid in itself, we could even play it without the ability. Its ability is what pushes it really over the top. For just 2 mana, we can crew any vehicle we control, no matter what the crew cost is, and we can use this again and again and again. Especially later in the game, when your board is filled with uncrewed vehicles, you can just pay 2 again and again and again and crew all of them and go for a swing. It's just crazy. You have to play this with Kolodin. They're like a match made in heaven. Another vehicle that we play to just filter through our deck is Raider's Scarf. It's a solid vehicle body, and whenever it swings, we get to flip the top card of our library. If it's a land, it comes into play tapped, and we get to accelerate that way. Solid. Unidentified hover ship from the Duskmourn set. Whenever we play it, we get to exile a creature with 5 toughness or less. So basically anything. Most of these cards, whenever they leave the battlefield, the owner gets the creature back under their control. Not with Unidentified hover ship. Card permanently stays exiled, but they get to manifest threat, which is a mechanic from the Duskmourn set. They basically get a 2/2. Really good card. Removal on a vehicle. Probably the most boring card in the deck, Bomat Bazak Barge. It's just a vehicle, 4 mana, 5/5. Really solid with Kolodin because you get to swing, and whenever it enters, it just draws you a card. Good fit for the deck. We have to play 100 cards, right? One of the weirder cards in the deck is Conqueror's Galleon. It's a 4 mana, 2/10 vehicle with crew 4. Whenever it swings, you get to return it to the battlefield, transformed under your control. With Kolodin, with haste, you will get to do this instantly when you play it. When it flips, it becomes a land, accelerating our mana this way. This is the main reason why we play it, but it also has more awesome abilities. We get to loot cards, draw cards, or recur cards from our graveyard. It's a really awesome land to have laying around later on in the game to just generate a ton of value when you have the mana to do it. The card I play, since I play in a pot with a lot of artifact players, looking at you, Jake, with your Iron Man deck, is Horde Hauler. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you get to create treasure tokens equal to the amount of artifacts that opponent controls. Again, with Kolodin, with haste, you get to swing instantly. It has trample. Just hit an Iron Man player with it and just see how many treasures you will get. Least amount I got was 5. Really solid value. Midnight Crusader Shuttle. It has a cool effect. Whenever it swings, the defending player gets a villainous choice. Basically, they can choose to sacrifice a creature of their choice, or you get control of one of their creatures and it's also attacking them together with this card. Really solid vehicle, can really blow out some Voltron players. If you played Baldur's Gate 3, you know this card. Nautiloid Ship. It's a 4 mana 5/5 flyer, really solid in itself with Kolodin. Whenever it enters the battlefield, you get to exile a graveyard, which can be really good against some self-mill reanimation players, whatever. Exiling a graveyard will always provide value. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you get to put into play one of the exiled cards with Nautiloid Ship. If you hit a self-mill player with this who just milled an Elesh Norn, it's yours now. The value on this can be really crazy depending on the board state. As we talked about in our top 5 commander video for the Aetherdrift set, one of the best vehicles for this deck is the RMS Titanic. It's a 7/1 flying trample creature, which gets crewed and hasted by Kolodin, so it has an immediate impact. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you get to create that many treasure tokens and sacrifice the ship. The value on this is crazy. We even play ways to recur it from our graveyard and generate a ton of treasure tokens. This and Kolodin, it's like a married couple. You must play them together. There's no way you play one without the other. I love spot removal, so we play Search Hacker Mech. Whenever it enters the battlefield, it deals damage equal to 2 times the amount of vehicles we control to target creature or planeswalker. Really solid. It will also count itself, so baseline it will always do 2 damage. Get through by Kolodin, gets haste, so you can swing with it immediately. Really solid impact. Weatherlight. Awesome vehicles, 4 mana, 4/5 flyer, which is really solid with Kolodin, can swing instantly. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, we get to look at the top 5 cards from our library and reveal 1 historic permanent, so artifacts, legendaries, and put it into our hand. Awesome to filter through your deck and just pick up what you need on the run. In my opinion, the best mount they have ever printed is Guardian Sunmare. There's a big saddle cost of 4, which gets bypassed by Kolodin anyways. Whenever it attacks while saddled, we get to search our library for a non-land permanent with mana value 3 or less and just put it into play. We don't have a lot of effects in Magic that allow us to tutor cards from our deck and put them directly into play. This card is absolutely broken. Not only in this deck, but also in other decks. You can just tutor up your deck for whatever you need, whatever solution you need for the board state at the time, and just put it into play. Can't counter it, can't interact with it, it comes into play. Crazy with Kolodin, since you can just bypass the saddle cost. It's a really solid card. Now we're getting into the really big vehicles to actually win the game with. First up, we have Knight Paladin. It's a 5 mana, 6/6 trample body, really solid. And whenever it enters the battlefield, you get to deal 4 damage to each opponent. Also, its crew cost is just 1, so it's easy to crew even when you don't have Kolodin on the field. Strong. Another vehicle that acts as a removal spell in this deck is Magmatic Galleon. So whenever it enters the battlefield, we get to deal 5 damage to a creature an opponent controls. Whenever a creature an opponent controls dies by non-combat damage, we get to create a treasure token. This will usually result in 1 treasure token, plus a bonus if you get to remove creatures by non-combat damage later on in the game, you get more treasure tokens. Just a really solid big vehicle. Probably the best vehicle that was printed in Aetherdrift for this deck is Salvation Engine. It has a passive effect that gives all other artifact creatures +2/+2, so a Lord effect, a really good one at that. And whenever it attacks, we get to put a creature card from our graveyard directly onto the battlefield. Again, you can just imagine this hitting the battlefield with Kolodin, gets crewed, you can swing instantly. Yeah, it's crazy. It buffs all of your existing vehicles. It returns a vehicle to the battlefield, which will also get crewed, will get haste. It's crazy. Insane value. Just imagine getting the Titanic back. A vehicle that actually saw a lot of play in standard and modern decks is Sky Sovereign, the console flagship. Whenever it enters, you get to deal 3 damage to any target. Whenever it attacks, you also get to deal 3 damage to any target. Just imagine having Kolodin on the field and playing this. Deal 3 damage to any target, gets crewed, gets hasted by Kolodin, you can swing, and you get to deal another 3 damage to any target. It's double removal for just 1 card. It's just a crazy vehicle. It's a game ender. This card just looks like a weird space Beyblade. Cybership. It's a 6 mana, 8/8 flyer. Whenever it deals combat damage to an opponent, the opponent exiles the top 2 cards of their library, and you get the 2 face-down cards under your control as 2/2 tokens. Really solid, they have no way to get the cards back. And you can use the 2/2s to crew your vehicles. It's something. Another well-known card from the Fallout series is the Pridwin, Steel Flagship. Tokens also have a really strong ability. Whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control this turn, they get +2/2. So most of the time, the tokens will be 4/4s. Perfect to just swing with or crew your big vehicles. If you want to grant all your vehicles flying, Thunderhawk Gunship is your card. It's a 6 mana, 6/6 flyer. Whenever it enters the battlefield, you get to generate 2 2/2 tokens. Awesome to crew your vehicles. Whenever the gunship attacks, all of your other attacking creatures will grant flying. Perfect way to close out a game if someone doesn't have a flying blocker. Now we're getting into the really big vehicles. For 7 mana, we have Reaver Titan. 10/10 stat line, and it has built-in self-protection. It has protection from everything with mana value 3 or less. So permanents with a mana value of 3 or less cannot interact with it, can block it, can damage it. Also spells with mana value 3 or less can target it. Whenever it attacks, it deals a whopping 5 damage to each opponent. So you basically need to swing a couple of times with this and the game will be over. Ever imagined a bunch of cute little hamsters balling up to a big ball, making a vehicle? Yeah, Rolling Hamsphere. It's a 7 mana, 4/4 vehicle, which gets +1/1 for every hamster you control. But Dennis, we don't play any hamsters. Yeah, just hear me out. The sphere itself will grant you hamsters. Whenever it attacks, you actually get 3 hamster tokens, and you get to deal X damage to any target equal to the hamsters you control. The ability triggers after you created the hamster, so baseline, you will do 3 damage. 3 lightning bolt. Just imagine this hitting the field with Kolodin already there, getting haste, getting crewed, and instantly be able to swing. The immediate impact is just crazy. This card has to be dealt with really fast or you will just take over the board. Card I'm not really sure about if I should play it, I still have to test it, is Valor's Flagship. It's also from the Aetherdrift set. 7 mana for a really big body with a really good stat line, but it just stops there. Kind of falls flat for 7 mana in my opinion. The cycle ability is where it's really awesome. You can pay 3 mana plus X and you get to create X pilot tokens and draw a card. Other than that, the body is not justified by the 7 mana cost. So yeah, I'll test it out and we'll see. The last and biggest vehicle in the deck is Parhelion 2. Yeah, what can I say? It's a really big vehicle, has an awesome stat line, awesome keywords. Whenever it attacks, you also get 2 4/4 flying angels tapped and attacking into play. Yeah, with Kolodin on the field, you drop this, can attack instantly, and the value it generates is it's crazy. It swings for 13 power once it hits the battlefield with Kolodin there, so it's crazy. You can even use the angels to crew your other vehicles or Parhelion. It's the ultimate vehicle, right? On to the next category, ramp and support. First up, we have land tax. As mentioned before, Boros really struggles in the mana department. I think land tax is an auto-include to any deck that plays white and doesn't have access to green. It's just a broken card. Drop this on turn 1 and you will never be behind on mana. Really solid card, filters through our deck, always ensures you have land drops, it's busted. Solo game, obviously. Although it's not that great with Kolodin, since he only requires 2 specific colored mana, we can use it to pay for his commander tax if he gets removed, and we just play too much big generic mana cost in this deck to not play Sol Ring. It's a must-have in the deck. A card that saw a lot of play in Modern is Springleaf Drum. It's a 1-drop artifact. When you tap it and another creature you control, you just generate 1 mana of any color. Most cases, Kolodin will just be there, lying around, not swinging. You can actually use Springleaf Drum to accelerate your mana. This is kind of cheating Boros, since you otherwise wouldn't have access to ramp. Awesome card. Also adds to your artifact count. Auto-include, Arcane Signet, it's 2-drop, accelerates our mana, and it scales with other cards in our deck that scale with the amount of artifacts we control. Same reason as Arcane Signet, Mind Stone, generates a colorless mana. We can also sacrifice it for card advantage. It helps with the 2 things we lack most, draw and ramp. Another mana rock, Talisman of Conviction, 2 mana, generates mana of any color we want, and it's an artifact to up our artifact count. Solid. Indomitable Creativity. This card is the most explosive card in the entire deck. It's a really fun card. So it costs 3 red mana and X. X is the amount of targets you can pick, and you can pick both your opponent's creatures or artifacts or your own. Basically, you get to cast a Chaos Warp on all of the targets. You can choose to do this on your own stuff, for example. Maybe targeting 5 treasure tokens, and you get to flip cards from the top of your library until you hit 5 creatures or artifact cards, and you get to put them into play. Again, if you hit vehicles with Kolodin, they will get haste, they will get crewed, and you get to swing instantly. You can also use this defensively. For example, your opponent is about to combo off, you destroy their commander, and they get to flip cards and just hit like a 1-1, for example. It's a crazy fun card. You can even divide targets on your opponents, yourself. It's crazy. When you have a lot of mana, you can just win the game instantly, just flipping big vehicles into play. Imagine a Sol Ring turning into a Parhelion 2. Crazy. You can use this early in the game, you can use this late in the game. Really fun card. Tempered Steel is an aura effect. It gives +2/+2 to all of our artifact creatures. So all vehicles will get +2/2. It's a solid card. Just play it. We're also playing 2 Planeswalkers. First up being Chandra Sparkhunter, the newest edition of the Aetherdrift set, and she's basically made for vehicle decks. She has a passive ability that will basically animate 1 vehicle you control on the beginning of combat on your turn. Really solid, basically does what Kolodin does, or just activates a vehicle without paying the crew cost. The +2 ability grants a ton of card advantage. She allows you to discard a card or sacrifice an artifact, and you get to draw a card. It's also a +2, so she will be at 6 loyalty if you use this when it enters, which is a lot to deal with. 0 ability will just grant you a 3/2 vehicle that you can crew for 1 power. Solid, also works well with her first ability. Emblem, if you get to it, will deal 3 damage to any target whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control. Really solid way to end the game, and it's really not that hard to achieve with her, since she has a +2 ability and starts at 4 loyalty. Really good card. The other Planeswalker we play, you probably could have guessed, is Dagetti. It's a classic in mono-red artifact decks. He has really crazy abilities, especially for this deck. His first ability allows us to loot, which is a really awesome way to filter through our deck and just discard our key value artifacts, which interacts really well with his minus ability. His minus ability allows us to sacrifice an artifact and return another one from our graveyard into play. We return a vehicle, we have Kolodin on the field, gets screwed, gets hasted, can't swing. The ult emblem is really awesome, but that's not the reason we play this card. We just play it for the plus and the minus ability and the synergy between the 2. Next category, most important in my opinion, interaction spells. As mentioned before, Kolodin is a really key part to this deck, and he just makes this deck really explosive. The deck will work without him, but you will have to crew your vehicles, they don't have haste, makes it really slow. Kolodin is the main engine of this deck, so we do need ways to protect him. Like for example, Blacksmith's Skill. It's an instant, 1 mana, grants a permanent, hexproof and indestructible. If it's a vehicle, it also gets +2/2. Perfect to protect Kolodin from a removal spell or buff your vehicles, whatever you'd like. A really similar spell is Lauren's Escape. Also gives a creature indestructible and hexproof and allows us to scry 1, which can be a benefit, just scrying lands to the bottom. Another Metalcraft card we play is Dispatch. It's 1 mana and it just taps a creature. If we have 3 or more artifacts and have the Metalcraft active, it will just exile a creature for 1 mana. Efficient removal spell. Talking about really efficient removal spells, we also play the 2 classics, Path to Exile and Swords to Plowshares. There's really no reason not to play them when you're in white. In my opinion, the strongest charm they've ever printed is Boros Charm. 2 mana, instant, permanent, it gives a creature double strike, or it gives all your permanents indestructible, or you can deal 4 damage to any player. All the options on this card are really good. Main reason we play it is for the indestructible on the entire board to protect ourselves from board wipes. But giving a creature double strike it can also be really good, or just dealing 4 damage to close out a game. It's just an insane card. You have to play this when you're in Boros, especially in an aggressive deck. Another really efficient removal spell, especially in a Kolodin deck, is Spring-Loaded Saw Blades. It's an artifact with flash, and whenever it enters the battlefield, it deals 5 damage to tapped creature. So whenever someone attacks you, you can just flash this in and deal 5 damage to their attacking creature. But it doesn't stop there. We have to craft with artifact mechanic for 4 mana, and then we get to flip it. When we flip it, it turns into a 5/5 vehicle, and it also gets crewed by Kolodin, gets hasted by Kolodin, and scales with the rest of our deck. It's a really good card in general, even when we don't craft it. A must include if you're in white and you actually care about your commander being on the board and actually sticking to the board is Flawless Maneuver. It's 0 mana for a protection spell for your entire board, including your commander. It's just a crazy card. You must play this in a white deck if you are actually a commander-centric deck. Before we move on to the lands, this video is actually made since we made a top 5 Aetherdrift commander video. This is the first video in the series. So we talked about our top 5 Aetherdrift commanders, which are the strongest in our opinion. We're going to be doing a deck tag on each single one of them. Kolodin being the first. We still have 1 slot left for a 6th deck tag video. Leave in the comments below which Aetherdrift legendary card you'd like to see a commander deck tag about. Let's move on to the utility lands. First up, we have the 2 monocolored artifact lands, Ancient 10 and the Great Furnace. They're just basically basic lands which also have the artifact type, so they scale with a lot of cards in our deck. There's no reason not to play them in this deck. I really like the channel lands, Eganjo being the white one. Basically it enters untapped and taps for a white, so it acts as a plains, and you can also channel it and deal 4 damage to target attacking creature. Each legendary creature you control, when you channel this, reduces the cost by 1, making it even more efficient. The red channel land is Sokenzan, also really good. For 4 mana, you can channel this, and you get to create 2 1/1 haste tokens. You can use these as blockers, you can use these to crew your vehicles. There's no reason not to play this. It just acts as a mountain with a bonus benefit. As mentioned before, we really love our card advantage in this deck since we don't have that many options in Boros. Fomori Vault is perfect for it. When you play it, you can just tap it for colorless mana, doesn't even enter tapped. You can invest 3 mana, tap it and discard a card. And you get to flip the top X cards of your library, where X is the amount of artifacts you control. Then you can choose 1 card, put it in your hand. It's crazy to filter through your deck. Sometimes you will even have 10, 20 artifacts in play at once when you have treasure tokens, and you can just pick the cards you need. It's basically a semi-tutor. It's a really solid land. No downside whatsoever. Classic land for artifact decks, Inventor's Fair. Grants you a small life bonus when you have artifacts in play with this land in play. Main benefit is you can sacrifice it and tutor your library for any artifact card you need. This is crazy in the late game when you need your big vehicles in your hand. You can just sacrifice it, tutor them up to your hand, and play them. Mech Hanger is cool land. It's not that spectacular. So it taps for colorless or any color if you use the mana for a pilot or a vehicle spell, which is most of the things in this deck. You can also pay 3 mana, tap it, and crew a vehicle, which can be really good with the more expensive vehicles to crew later in the game if you don't have the creatures to tap for them and just want to use mana. One of my favorite white lands is Minas Tirith. So whenever you control a legendary creature, it just enters untapped, acting as a plains. Most of the time you will control Kolodin in this deck, or just try to get him out on turn 2 as early as possible. So from there on, this will enter untapped. For 2 mana, if you attack with 2 creatures, you can tap this land and draw a card. Again, in Boros we don't have many draw options. This solves the problem on a land, so awesome. Last utility land we have is Monumental Henge. When we control plains, it enters untapped, so it just acts as a plains. Really good. For 4 mana, we can tap it, look at the top 5 cards of our library, and reveal a historic card from it. That we get to put into our hand. Once again, a land that gives us card advantage. I will quickly go over the regular lands in this deck. It's nothing spectacular since it's a 2-color deck, so let's go. Spire of Industry. It's basically City of Brass, but better for artifact decks. Command Tower, must include in any commander deck. We also play 3 fetch lands. They're awesome cards just to filter through your deck and reduce the amount of basic land cards in your deck you can draw. 1 shock land, 1 pain land, 1 check land, 1 of the bond lands, play 1 of the flip lands, 1 filter land, 1 of the horizon lands, which will also give us card advantage, which is awesome. 1 slow land, 1 of the lands from the Aetherdrift land cycle. I have no idea what it's called. It's been played in Duskmorn and in Aetherprint, so yeah. Let us know in the comments below what the land cycle is called. 7 plains, and 4 mountains. That's it for the Kolodin deck tech video. As mentioned before, every new Magic set that releases, we'll be doing a top 5 commanders tier list. We will be doing a deck tech video about all 5 of those commanders. If we have extra time, we can do extra commanders from the new sets. So this time we have 1 slot left. If you have a commander or legendary card from Aetherdrift you'd like to see a deck tech about, just leave it in the comments below. We will see what we can do and make a deck tech out of it. Kolodin is my favorite from our top 5. Go check out the video to see what Jig's favorite card from the top 5 is and what we will be doing a deck tech about next. Thanks for watching the content. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye.